Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It's Monday, June 1st, and we have an NBA Finals matchup set. Spurs versus Knicks. It's going to be an unbelievable finals. I'm going to tell you all the reasons why I'm so excited for this matchup. But before we can get there, we have a lot to cover on this podcast. It's been a while since my last episode. First and foremost, we need to talk about the incredible close to the Western Conference Finals that was capped off with the Game 7 on Saturday night. Discuss everything that we learned in that series, where the Thunder go from here, how they can get back to the NBA Finals next year. We will quickly recap the Eastern Conference Finals, although there isn't a lot to talk about. I did go live on my last podcast after Game 1 of Cavs-Knicks. The Knicks came back in dramatic fashion in that one, and then Games 2 through 4 was just wheels up for the Knicks, but we will quickly cover that series, what we learned in that series, where the Cavs go from here, and then, of course, at the end of this podcast, we will go through the Spurs-Knicks matchup, everything that I'm going to be looking for during the NBA Finals, and, of course, my series predictions. So, loaded podcast today. Hopefully, you guys enjoy. So first things first, we have to dive into the Western Conference and give you guys a little bit of context leading into the Game 7 on Saturday. And I'm not sure about you guys. I still felt like overall this series lived up to the hype. I could see how you could make the argument it was a bit of a disappointment after the incredible Game 1 that went into double overtime. I mean, arguably the best basketball game I've seen all year long. That the rest of the games, or at least games 2 through 6, were a bit of a letdown just because the end of all those games wasn't very close. But Game 2 was still a pretty good game. It was back and forth for a while there. The Thunder ended up pulling that one out. Game 3, the Spurs had an unbelievable start. I think they jumped off to like a 15-0 lead. That was the first game in San Antonio. I was actually in Austin for that game. So that's kind of like a secondary market of the Spurs. There was a nice buzz around the city. The Spurs get off to an awesome start, and the Thunder end up steamrolling them in the second half, win Game 3 very comfortably. The Spurs do answer, of course, in Game 4, win that one very convincingly. The Thunder rebound, win Game 5 very convincingly. And then, of course, in Game 6 in San Antonio, the Spurs absolutely level the Oklahoma City Thunder, which is setting the scene for, again, the Game 7 on Saturday night. So it did feel like a coin flip series for the last 2 weeks. My pick was Spurs in 7 before the series, so I did feel pretty good that once San Antonio was able to secure a comfortable win in Game 6, that they would have the juice to go into Oklahoma City and win. But still, it did feel like home court made a real difference, not just in how the games were officiated, but just also with the momentum, and especially for the Spurs being a younger team. And so I did just want to dive into Game 7 and some of the things that stood out to me when I was watching the game. And it starts off with the way that the Spurs started that game on Saturday night. I mean, Wemby and Castle set the tone early, got the first few baskets of the game, and I think that that was crucial. Now, we had seen games, like I mentioned, when Game 3, where the Spurs started off really hot, and it didn't end up mattering. The Thunder always took that first punch really well, and they came all the way back in Game 3 and won that one comfortably. But I did feel like if OKC got up early in that Game 7, just with their experience, the crowd behind them, it could have gotten ugly for San Antonio there. But, of course, the Spurs had a really awesome opening stretch. Again, I mentioned Wemby and Castle getting the first few buckets of the game. The Spurs actually go up 14 points 7 minutes into the game, which ended up being the largest lead by either team throughout the entire game, which is kind of crazy. The Thunder made the decision to start not just Cason Wallace. Actually, Jared McCain was in the starting lineup for a few of those games before that. They went back to Cason Wallace. But the consistent was they started Lou Dort every game, which was kind of wild to think about because, just to be honest with you, Lou Dort was fucking terrible in this series. Like, I think he's as good as gone from that roster this offseason. They should have made the move to Caruso really at any point during the series, or maybe even gone with a smaller lineup of McCain and Cason Wallace. I don't care what it is, but Dort played 15 minutes in this game, and it might have been 15 minutes too many, just taking threes out of rhythm early in the shot clock, not just like bailout, wide open corner threes. No, he was gunning like he was shooting the ball well from three this series, and he absolutely wasn't. The defense, he did make some plays here and there, but overall, he's not the same level of defender he was a couple years ago. And it's very lucky for the Thunder that Jared McCain was able to make a nice little run, had 8 first quarter points, and ended up making it a nice competitive game at the end of the first quarter. The Thunder actually went on such a large run that they stretched the lead to 4 points, and the Spurs answered with a nice little run themselves, which allowed them to retake the lead heading into the second quarter. But I did think that first quarter was pretty interesting, the way the Spurs were able to start that off, and we saw that the Thunder were able to answer that punch like they've been able to do many times throughout this series. It's worth noting SGA was unbelievable in this game. He finished the game with 39 points, but 25 of those 39 points came in the second and third quarters. That's when he really got into a rhythm. He looked absolutely unstoppable, and it was in those second and third quarters I felt like the game could have gone either way. Fox had easily his best game of the entire series, but when he really got rolling was in that second quarter. Once he saw a few mid-range shots off the dribble fall for him, Champagnie was also unbelievable in this game. 20 points on 6 of 11 shooting from three and was a team high plus 16 in the matchup. And so he did most of his damage in that second and third quarter as well. The Spurs extended a lead to 11 points in the third quarter, only for the Thunder to end up answering that punch again. Jalen Williams had several timely threes in this game, and one of them actually cut the lead down late in the third quarter off of like a quick release, end of shot clock situation. And the Spurs only ended up being ahead by 3 points heading into the fourth quarter. And that's when things got really interesting. I mean, Caruso overall had a really awful game seven. It just felt like he was too aggressive. He was never in a rhythm on offense, but his best play of the game was when he got out in the open court, just launched himself at the rim at Wembanyama, basically tried to kill Wemby and the rim, and actually messed up his wrist a little bit because he tried to dunk it so hard, and Wemby did foul him. Got to the line, but again, he apparently banged up his wrist, so the outside shot that wasn't there to begin with certainly wasn't there the rest of the game. I would be remiss to not mention the Luke Cornett block with 6 minutes left in the game. The Spurs were up 6 at that point. They had a lead, but it did feel like OKC had some momentum. Luke Cornett, I mean, he basically knew that he had 1 minute left in potentially his entire season because Wemby was about to check back into the game. Hartenstein gets the ball in a fast break, and Luke Cornett moved faster than I've ever seen him move in his entire life to block the shot. Easily would have been a 4-point swing because that would have been a layup for OKC that would have cut the game down to 4. Instead, Castle gets a bucket on the other end and they extend the lead to 8. There was a pretty insane Julian Champagnie step back 3 over SGA late in that fourth quarter as well. McCain actually had a really great opportunity to potentially keep the game close. Could have cut the lead down to just 6 points with 4 minutes and 44 seconds left in the game. You guys might have seen this, but Wemby sprinted the entire length of the court to contest Jared McCain in the corner and actually almost got a hand on the ball. Harper had a really timely putback layup to go up 11 points with 4.5 minutes left in the game, and that's actually when head coach of the Thunder, Mark Dagnall, used his last timeout, so you could tell he was very desperately trying to hold on to any momentum that he could at that point in the fourth quarter, but it was basically a wrap at that point. It was interesting to see Mitch Johnson for most of that stretch at the end of the game close with the 3-guard lineup that we've mentioned before with Fox, Harper, and Castle because they all played pretty awesome in that game. And then, of course, the other 2 players in the court being Champagnie as well as Wemby. Cason Wallace was going on a burner this entire fourth quarter. I want to say he had 14 of his 17 points in the fourth quarter and hit some pretty insane threes. Like they were just kind of trading baskets down the stretch. And he did cut the Spurs lead down to 6 with just 2 minutes left in the game. Castle immediately followed up with that with a turnover, so it did feel like OKC had a little bit of momentum. But at this point in the game, late in the fourth quarter, SGA was just completely gassed. He ended up settling for a step back 3 with about a minute and a half left in the game, which I actually didn't hate the take because you obviously would have cut it down to a 1-possession game at that point if it fell. And it just felt like he was too exhausted to put in the work to actually get to the basket or even get to his spot in the mid-range. But ultimately, that 3-point attempt wasn't close. There was actually a pretty insane offensive rebound situation with less than a minute left in the game, and Fox had a really heady play where he just committed an intentional foul because they did have a foul to give, and at that point any momentum that OKC had was completely lost. I think they ended up settling for a really deep Caruso 3 when the game was basically out of reach, and of course the final buzzer expires. You guys might have seen Wemby going completely apeshit on the court, kind of crying, freaking out, hugging his teammates. I love to see it, and that was how game 7 concluded. So to be honest with you, just to give you my 10,000 foot view and dive into this game a little bit more, I would say if you knew nothing about either of these teams heading into the matchup, I think you would assume that the Spurs were the defending champs in this game. I mentioned it before, the way that they came out of the gates early and set the tone, got the first few baskets of the game. But it wasn't just that. I mean, if you go down the entire Spurs roster, really everybody on the team had a pretty significant game. Like Fox, he had 15 points, easily his best game of the series. Not that it was any sort of vintage Kings De'Aaron Fox performance, but compared to the guy that was hobbling around for games like 3 through 6 earlier in the series. It was night and day how much quicker he looked, how much more comfortable he looked getting to his spot. Harper had a top 3 game in the series for him. Game 1, he was pretty phenomenal. Game 6, he was really good as well. But I just thought the buckets that he had were really timely, including a really tough step back 3 in the fourth quarter. The offensive rebound that I mentioned that extended the lead to 11. Champagnie, easily his best game of the series, a very loud 20 points on 6 threes. Cornette, I mean, he really only played halfway decent in 2 of these games, one of those being in San Antonio earlier in the series. But that block might have been the play of the entire series, so you obviously appreciate his contributions. It wasn't Castle's best game, but he was still hyper aggressive. I mean, Keldon Johnson had a few insane shots, a couple like really heavily contested threes that I didn't think were going in that ended up falling. It honestly wasn't the best Wemby game, but he did enough on both ends of the court to secure the win, especially with the way that the rest of his team was playing. Maybe not the best game for Vassell if you're really picking nits. He was still fine out there. But again, I just went through basically every player in the Spurs rotation, and they all played pretty well. Meanwhile, you look at the other end for OKC. I mean, SGA was the best player on the court in Game 7. Make no mistakes about it. He was phenomenal in that game. I mentioned the Cason Wallace heater that he went on in the fourth quarter. But again, even in the first 3 quarters, he wasn't very impactful, only scoring 3 points. Jalen Williams, the one that comes off the bench, was really awesome this entire series and hit some really timely threes. He was great for the Thunder. And I think McCain, even though he didn't have the most efficient night shooting the ball, did what he needed to do, desperately gave them that spark in the first quarter. But outside of those 4 guys, and again, being SGA, Cason Wallace, Jalen Williams, and Jared McCain, nobody else really made a massive impact on the game for OKC. You didn't feel Hartenstein that much in the minutes that he played, and he was a minus 14 in those. Caruso was, again, completely out of control on both ends of the court. He actually had some really miserable flops, too, like one play where he was getting pressured handling the ball and just launched himself out of bounds and then, like, sat there, like, arms crossed, like he was expecting to get a blocking foul. It's like, you're not getting the SGA whistle, buddy, just because you're his teammate. I didn't understand that. Dort, I mentioned at the top, he just fucking sucks. He played 15 minutes, and it might have been 15 minutes too many. And then, of course, we have Chet Holmgreen, who was completely awful, and he gets his own little segment here because he was 4 points on just 2 shots in this game. He shot 1 of 2 from the field. He also was 2 of 4 from the line. 4 rebounds, 2 blocks is his complete stat line. He passed up a ton of shots. He looked extremely uncomfortable out there throughout the entire game. Didn't take a single shot from 3. And if you ask me, like in a vacuum, what is Chet's superpower? It's obviously his ability to protect the rim first and foremost, but also give you spacing as a really fantastic 3-point shooter on the other end of the court. And he didn't even take a single look. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about the fact that he played against Wemby growing up, matchups against Chet when they were playing against each other in these international games. Like Wemby took it very personally. And so there's a bit of like a rivalry just because they both play like a similar position. But it's never been a rivalry. Wemby's always been leaps and bounds better as a prospect. I'm sure he's dominated really all of the head-to-head stuff, certainly since they've been in the NBA. And you can't even really blame the Wemby thing for this Chet performance because Chet was not guarding Wemby for the vast majority of the game on defense, and Wemby was not guarding Chet for the vast majority of the game on offense. I mean, there was one possession in particular that it's been clipped, and I've seen it a million times on Twitter, where Chet catches the ball in the right corner, and he has Wemby on him, and he actually looks to attack, and he just kind of like topples over, which a lot of people are making fun of him because it looks so awkward, especially for how big and goofy he is, and he kind of fell like a baby deer out there. But look, I mean, out of all the times you want Chet to attack, I personally didn't want it to be the one where he was guarded by the best defender on the planet. Like, that one didn't make a lot of sense, but of course, Reggie Miller is going nuts in the broadcast, being like, attack, attack. And so, maybe that finally got home to Chet. I'm not too sure, but I actually think the lack of rebounding and the lack of just his presence on this game might have even been worse than the lack of offense. Because to be honest with you, like, there is some of the blame that can be assigned to Coach Dagnall for just acknowledging how out of rhythm Chet was for this entire game and the fact that they didn't seem to scheme him up really any easy looks to just get him going in the offense. Like, maybe there was stuff said in huddles, and maybe there were some plays drawn up that just didn't go well for him, and I'm missing that. But he actually had a really nice move to start the game. He scored on his first bucket. His second field goal attempt was a floater over Wemby that was also in the first quarter. And then again, he just basically didn't shoot the rest of the entire game. And not only that, I mean, he could barely catch the ball. There was one time where he flashed to the middle of the lane and kind of bobbled the catch and almost turned it over there. He didn't even like fill the lanes on fast break a couple different times that I noticed. And I did rewatch this game after on Saturday night just to try to mainly figure out what the hell happened with Chet. And again, he wasn't even filling lanes on fast breaks because he just didn't want the ball. And of course, there's been a lot made up about Chet and his max contract that hasn't even kicked in yet. The first year of his max contract is going to be next season. And so there's a lot of questions being asked. What do the Thunder do with this Chet performance? Is it going to continue? Is it something that he's never going to get over in upcoming matchups with Wembanyama and the Spurs? I can't answer all those questions, but I will say this. I do think that the Chet hate, it's going to be awful. It's going to linger on him the entire offseason. He's going to carry it with him to next season, and he should, because it wasn't just this game either. He was pretty awful throughout the entire series. I think he averaged less than 10 points a game. You really never noticed him out there. I will say that even in game 7, when he was doing next to nothing on offense, he did have a couple really nice blocks. I think both of them came against Dylan Harper and a few other plays where he had some nice contests at the rim. So I don't think the defense waned too much compared to what we saw in the regular season, but in a nutshell, I don't think that they should trade him because true stretch bigs that also protect the rim are really hard to find. Now, if you want to sit here and say, like, she's never going to develop and he's not going to be worth that contract because the offense is never going to come along, I hear you. I'm not saying that Chet's ever going to be the type of guy to take somebody off the dribble or like have a lot to his offensive game where he's creating for himself. But he doesn't need all that, especially with the team that he's on, to be really productive because he is a plus shooter. If he can speed up the jump shot a little bit, he does have a bit of an ugly jumper, and I certainly have ugly jumper bias, but he is a great shooter. Like, he can improve on that. He can improve on the mid range. He can get a couple moves in his bag. Maybe he fills out a little bit. He obviously just got named to the 3rd team All NBA, so that's a lot of the reason why he's getting so much hate. But he's never going to be that good of an offensive player. But I do think that they might be able to fix the aggression and the confidence issues. And if you want to really pick nits in OKC, they felt like they were a guy short offensively. And obviously Chet didn't step up, but he was never really that guy for them anyway. Their second best offensive player was always Jalen Williams, who didn't play, of course, due to the hamstring injury. And the third best offensive player was AJ Mitchell, who wasn't out there either. So I'm not giving Chet a pass. I thought it was a pretty embarrassing performance. It was an awful game 7. The game was close enough where if he had like an average regular season game from Chet, it easily could have swung the matchup of this series and ultimately could swing the NBA champion this year. So I think he is taking an appropriate amount of heat, but anybody just immediately penciling him in for a trade just to get him off the roster, I just think that that would be a pretty rash decision for a guy that's still really young and made an All-NBA team. So before we move on from this game and this series as a whole, I do want to spend a little bit of time on the Thunder because this is the last time we are going to talk about them, probably until the offseason or maybe before next season. I did want to reiterate this was a coin flip series. I felt like it could have gone either way. Game 7 could have gone either way. And you can certainly at least make an argument that if the Thunder had just one of AJ Mitchell or Jalen Williams healthy throughout the majority of this series, that might have been enough to swing the outcome of the series. It also might not have mattered. I want to acknowledge that as well. I mean, we did have game 1 where both AJ Mitchell and Jalen Williams played. Jalen Williams was, of course, returning from that hamstring injury, but he was awesome in that game, played a ton of minutes, and that's probably what led to him re-injuring that hamstring in game 2. But in that game 1, he did play. AJ Mitchell played as well and was basically invisible, and it didn't matter. The Spurs ended up coming out on top in that matchup. So maybe Wemby would have elevated his game a little bit and the Spurs win game 7 anyway. But just telling you what I saw when I watched game 7, when I rewatched it back on Sunday, it felt like they were a guy short in that matchup. Just desperately needed one more guy to shoulder more of the load, to give SGA a little bit more rest and make the minutes that SGA did play a little bit less demanding. And Jared McCain did his best to do that, but ultimately you can't count on a guy in his second season who you traded for in the middle of the season to step in and be an essential part of your offense into game 7. That was crazy to even think about the situation that the Thunder found themselves in. So if there is a move to be made for the Thunder, I might be in the minority here after that awful Chet game, but I still think that trading Jalen Williams for like a larger forward or maybe even breaking up his contract into smaller parts that makes it easier to afford the rest of the roster would probably be the move for the Thunder, just because I really like Jalen Williams. I know he had some really awesome games in the finals last year as well. The hamstring injury is obviously a concern. He did come in a little bit older when he entered the NBA, so I think he's already like 25. And I also just feel like his position, just finding guys with his skill set, is a little bit easier than finding guys that can do what Chet does. And again, I know it's tough to say after that awful game, but again, Chet being a guy that can both protect the rim and space the floor and bring real size to the team, whereas Jalen Williams is like 6'5", 6'6". He plays bigger than that, but if they just have a more traditional power forward or somebody with a bit more size, and even again, just shipping out his contract and getting some quality role players back in return and just giving them the flexibility to extend guys like AJ Mitchell might be in the best interest of the Thunder long term. But they don't have to do that. They can just say, hey, we weren't healthy in this series and we played the Spurs, who are a phenomenal team, really close, and we just want to run it back. I wouldn't blame them for that, because I don't even think they need to ship out Chet either. Because even if Chet has this mental block over Wemby and he's awful in the Spurs series next year, the Thunder might be able to win just because how well Hartenstein and the other Jalen Williams played in that matchup. So I did just want to call out and close my OKC thoughts by just giving Shea his flowers here for a second. He didn't have his best series. He had quite the challenge with both Castle as the primary assignment and Wemby constantly lurking, like 5 black jerseys looking at Shea every time he had the ball in his hands. But he really did not have anybody else to shoulder the load offensively. And I think that you can attribute a lot of his struggles earlier on in this series to that being the main reason. And I think he deserves a ton of credit for putting on a show in the Game 7 performance. He had a phenomenal game, again, scoring 39 points, looked like the best player on the court. And I think he quieted a lot of people, because I've never really been an SGA guy. I would have voted for him had I had a vote for MVP this season. But that being said, like I don't love the guy, but I just felt like the hate that this guy got over the past couple weeks, just from like the clips and how many lowlights people were aggregating and putting online. It was crazy. And I just got to say, like, there was this segment with Jay Williams. It was like a life alert segment with SGA where they just cut up a bunch of clips of him falling in games. And a few of them were egregious. Like, he was definitely flopping. And then they like compared it to like the Spurs and Castle taking some contact, and he actually fell, but the contact was real. And they're like, and that's why the Spurs are winning this series. And I was like, man, what is this like smear campaign on the guy that just won back-to-back MVPs? Like, it just got so weirdly negative for a guy that, again, you can criticize the way that he plays and how he manipulates the officials, but beyond that, he's not giving you much to hate on him for. So I just thought the way he answered the bell in Game 7 was pretty impressive. And look, if we're going to pivot this real quickly into best of the world talk, I think that's a nice little segue here. I do think Wemby's the best player in the world. I mentioned that the belt was in SGA's hands at the end of the regular season, and I felt like this series would do a lot to determine who I think the best player in the world is. But it was pretty close. I mean, I think Wemby was the better player, or was the best player in the game for 4 out of the 7 games this series. But I do think Shea was the best player in the other 3. I think Shea was better in games 3, 5, and 7. And I think Wemby was better in games 1, 2, 4, and 6, if you guys are curious on my opinion. It really just comes down to like the fact that even in the games where Wemby struggles a little bit offensively and it looks a little awkward, and I know a lot of people are nitpicking his ability to create his own shot and just how difficult it can be for somebody of his size to create stuff off the dribble, it didn't really matter. I mean, he still found a way to get his points, whether it was through crashing the offensive glass, whether it was through just being such a massive lob threat. And it did feel like he always made enough jumpers to truly be a threat from the outside. And the few games you have, like games 1 and game 6, where the jumpers are really falling, it just becomes like downright scary. And of course, even in the games where he completely sucks offensively, Wemby is still giving you an elite defensive ceiling, unlike any other player I've literally ever seen in my life. So I do think the best player in the world belt has been passed. It wasn't like a total blowout, but I mean, Wemby has definitely arrived, and he should have an even easier time against the Knicks. So that's one of the many things I'm looking forward to next round. So let's pivot to a much less exciting series, that of course being the Eastern Conference Finals, Knicks versus Cavs. And like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, not a ton to cover after Game 1, after the incredible Knicks comeback that I covered with Sean on my last podcast, but I will quickly run through games 2 through 4 here just to catch you guys up to speed. After Josh Hart was benched for Landry Shamet in Game 1, and that was like the main change that Mike Brown made that sparked that massive comeback, Josh Hart was the absolute hero of Game 2. The Cavs made the conscious decision to leave the guy wide open from 3 in both of the opening games. It looked like a genius move from Kenny Atkinson in Game 1, and in Game 2, Josh Hart made him pay. He led the Knicks in scoring, hit 5 threes, and the Knicks cruised to an easy win, largely because of the performance of Josh Hart. In Game 3, the Knicks cruise again behind a really efficient 30 points from Jalen Brunson, including 9th in the 4th quarter. And honestly, at the end of that Game 3, that was the first game in Cleveland of the series, it looked like the Cavs basically quit. I mean, they gave up a wide open Jalen Brunson layup when the game was like somewhat in reach late in that 4th quarter. Even Mike Breen mentioned the lack of effort on that play in which Brunson got that wide open layup. And we're all kind of sitting around thinking like, oh, is that like indicative of what's going to come in game 4? And it certainly was. I mean, the Knicks just blow the doors off the Cavs in game 4. You knew it by the end of the first quarter when the Cavs actually got off to a decent start and the Knicks stretched the lead all the way to 12 points. And I think at one point the Cavs were actually down 45 points in the fourth quarter. So just like we saw against Atlanta, just like we saw against Philly, the Knicks have just been absolutely dominant in these closeout games and dusted the Cavs in a very convincing 4 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. So before we talk about the Knicks real quick, we do have to talk about the Cavs and just talk about where they go from here. And I wouldn't say that this Eastern Conference Finals run for the Cavs was like a total fluke, as like I do want to acknowledge that. I mean, the Raptors were a pretty soft round 1 matchup, and the Cavs did have to go 7 games to beat them there. But I think Detroit overall was still a tough out, despite them being a flawed team. And I still think, all things told, that you can't really make a better argument for anybody else as being the second best team in the conference behind the Knicks. I mean, if you really want to get creative, maybe you can say my Celtics and they just happen to be on the other side of the bracket and they choked against Philly. Maybe you'd say Philly. Maybe you think Philly would beat the Cavs too, and they just didn't have the opportunity to play that matchup out. But ultimately, I do think the Cavs were probably the second best team in the conference. There's just such a massive gap between them and the Knicks. Does it really matter? And so if you want to put them in the same tier as like that fluky Hawks run in the Eastern Conference Finals a couple years ago, or like the Portland run to the Western Conference Finals in the midst of that Golden State run, I mean, go for it. I do think the Cavs deserve to be here, but it's very obvious that they are not contenders at all. Mitchell, I think, saved face a little bit in this series just because he still found a way to get his points on decent efficiency. He was 27 points per game, but you would like to see him with a bit better playmaking. I'm not moving him. I'm not getting creative and being in a rush to trade Donovan Mitchell if I'm running the Cavs, just because he is the best player. And I do think he showed something during this playoff run, and at least he has the experience of making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I'm not like, wow, Donovan Mitchell's stock went up after that run. I feel like I'm pretty neutral on him. James Harden, I think the whole playoff experience, I know he had some highs, he had some nice moments, mainly in that Detroit series, but he was a disaster against the Knicks, man. I mean, he averaged more turnovers than assists. He actually scored the ball well for his standards in the playoffs. I think he was like 17 points a game. But for James Harden to average more turnovers, which was he was at 4.3 a game compared to assists where he was just 3 assists a game, that's a horrible look, man, because I feel like if you're the Cavs, the main reason why you're going out and getting James Harden, it's A, because you trust him more than Darius Garland, you trust his availability, you trust his experience a little bit. And above all else, you're expecting his playmaking to permeate through the offense. You think because you have James Harden, you're going to get more out of Evan Mobley, maybe unlock his offensive game. You're going to get more out of Jared Allen. You're going to get more lobs, and maybe even make Donovan Mitchell better too. I didn't see any of that. I don't think James Harden made anybody on his team better in this series. I mean, comparatively on defense, if you compare his defense to anybody else, I guess guys like Sam Merrill and Max Strus look like they're freaking Gary Payton out there. But beyond that, there's no positive about what I saw from James Harden. I mean, I guess he was a little bit less scared to shoot than what he's been in previous series, but the lack of playmaking and how much he turned the ball over was like honestly disturbing. Mobley still left you wanting a little bit more in this series, but it's hard for me to like put the blame on him, to be honest with you. I think he showed a little bit more of his own creation and like ball handling than what I thought. I do think he's a great defender, but I don't think he's like some special generational defender. I think even Chet, for all the heat he's getting right now, is much more impressive defensively than Mobley ever has been. I still don't understand how Mobley won Defensive Player of the Year a couple years ago. So I think he's great, but I don't think he's ever going to live up to the hype of what people expect he's going to be. And the biggest reason that the Cavs lost this series against the Knicks, I mean, they were clearly at a talent deficit. Clearly, Kenny Atkinson had circles coached around him in this matchup. But above all else, it was the massive gap between the Cavs wings and the Knicks wings. I mean, Dean Wade just sucks. I have no idea why that guy starts. I know he's like a sneaky, decent defender. There's like some sort of like Sam Hauser parallels there where people just attack Sam Hauser because he looks white and vulnerable on the court. And maybe people do the same with Dean Wade, but he's actually one of their better on-ball defenders. But I didn't see nearly enough defense to warrant him being in the starting lineup. I mean, Strus, I don't want to bash Strus too much because I think he was unbelievable in that Pistons series, but he lost his touch. He was not shooting the ball nearly as well against the Knicks. And the fact that he being Max Strus was the primary on-ball assignment for Jalen Brunson in that series just shows how badly the Cavs are lacking any type of elite defensive personnel beyond, Mobley and Allen are fine, whatever, but like they need an on-ball perimeter guy, and Max Strus was way over his skis getting the Brunson assignment. You had pretty bad shooting from Sam Merrill too. Jordan Tyson gave you nothing after showing some promise in the regular season. Keon Ellis barely played. And you compare that to the way that Hart, Bridges, and Anunoby played in this series, it's no surprise that it was a sweep. So if I'm the Cavs and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do for next season, I mean, it's a tough spot. I don't think there's any right answer or like magic move or two that they can make to immediately put themselves in the contending tier. This is probably their best opportunity to go to the NBA Finals, and they didn't even really come all that close. I wouldn't re-sign James Harden. Let's just start there. But to be honest with you, it does feel like they had some sort of agreement when they traded for him this season that we're definitely going to extend you after the season. And it does seem like the rumors going around right now are that he's going to sign at less than what his player option would be. And so he'll sign a longer term extension, but it's probably still going to be in like that 25 to $30 million range. So it's going to be a lot of money. I think James Harden's already like 36 or so. It's not going to get any better for James Harden, but they seem to be committed for him. And if you do have to guarantee that, like, let's just say that Harden deal is done for all intensive purposes, then I think the move is like you have to trade Jarrett Allen, who I like. He was actually the hero in Game 7 against the Raptors. He's had some awesome moments for them. He's a very consistent player. But that being said, like, there's something that's missing with Mobley's offensive ceiling, and maybe he taps into that a little bit more if he's forced into that lineup. And I do think there are enough teams out there with the emergence of Wemby, with Jokic still being a threat. Like, there's enough teams out there that need centers. The Celtics would love a Jarrett Allen. I think a team like the Lakers would love Jarrett Allen. I mean, there's a lot of teams out there that could use his services, and maybe you could turn him into some assets that you could use to improve the wing position and get some better on-ball defenders. Obviously, if you do move Allen, I think you have to then backfill that position with a couple extra centers on the roster too, because as much as you should be mixing in Mobley at the 5, I don't know if you should just like slot him in to be your permanent 5 all season long. I don't know if he can hold up, and I think the rebounding would take quite a big hit because I don't think he's that good of a rebounder to survive that. Like, even in the playoffs, they didn't want to go to Mobley at the 5 for all that long. So you're really grasping at straws here, but I think if the Harden extension is already settled, then Allen has to be the guy that you look to move. Maybe they backfill that with like a Rob Williams or something like that on the back end if they move on from Jarrett Allen. But last notes on the Cavs is that it was an awful series from Kenny Atkinson. I mean, the lack of timeouts and just allowing that massive comeback in Game 1. Had some very weird quotes throughout the series where he said like analytically they won 2 of the 3 first games, talking about like the shots that they took compared to the shots that the Knicks took. I mean, really just truly loser shit from Kenny Atkinson trying to justify where his team was at being down 3-0 at that point. It's just really bizarre. But they've already announced, like, anytime that your team has to announce that Kenny Atkinson is remaining the head coach, basically making an announcement to say the guy didn't get fired. Like, obviously the Cavs aren't thrilled with what they got from him in the Eastern Conference Finals. And so I'm not saying you have to move on from the guy. Like, coaching the NBA is very tough. I think Game 1 was a disaster, but it did seem like a lot of his philosophies are pretty antiquated, and just like the way he handled himself in front of the media didn't do himself any favors. So I'm not saying you have to fire Kenny Atkinson, but it's hard to be like, wow, I feel great about our coach heading into next season. So all things told, the Cavs, it's going to be a huge stretch for them to even get back to this point, let alone enter that contender tier conversation. And there's really no easy moves for this team to make. So I expect them to run it back, but I think if the Cavs ever want to change their fortunes for this window with Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley, they have to look to make some pretty massive changes here. So final thoughts on the Eastern Conference Finals. Let's talk about it from the Knicks perspective real quick, starting with Jalen Brunson, who was lights out in this series. I think he showed he's like clearly a level above Donovan Mitchell, which even I probably would have preferred Mitchell as of like a year or two ago. But the way Brunson closes these games, the way he raises his level of play in the playoffs is pretty ridiculous. Even in a series in which he wasn't even shooting the ball all that well, he shot 18% from 3, and they were still that dominant, and he still felt really confident throughout this entire series. Bridges has been on an absolute heater, which is really funny to think about because at the tail end of the regular season, I mean, he was just awful. Like, Knicks fans were like outside of his home with pitchforks. I think he was benched in a handful of games. I mean, it was really a up and down season for Bridges, but he is luckily peaking at the right time. He did not miss inside the arc. He actually struggled a bit from 3 as well. He shot just 29% from 3, but he actually shot 57% from the field, mainly powered by how like ridiculously smooth his mid-range jumper is. Again, he looks like a baby Kevin Durant out there when he gets going. I think the most shocking thing when I was watching the Knicks is just like, how the fuck did OG Anunoby's hamstring heal that quickly? I mean, you look at the hamstring spectrum here with Jalen Williams on the Thunder, who the poor guy suffers the same hamstring injury 4 times throughout the season. I felt so horrible that the Thunder even dragged that guy back for game 6 just for him to limp around and be like awful in the minutes that he played. I just felt terrible for the guy. And then meanwhile, you have OG Anunoby, who had a couple hamstring injuries this year. One of them was in the round 2 series against Philly, and he comes back against the Cavs and looks unbelievable. I mean, he dunked everything. He shot the ball well from 3. His ISO game is looking better than what it's ever been, and you know the level of defense that you're going to get from OG Anunoby. So he looks amazing. Cat was awesome in this series as well. He mostly avoided foul trouble. He was easily the best big in the series, which is saying something with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley also out there. He got back to more 3-point attempts than what he was shooting in the regular season and also shot 50% from 3. And you're going to need him to be special in the finals. So it's nice that Cat has some positive momentum. I mean, Landry Shamet, if you thought he was good in the previous series, he was just on an absolute heater. He shot 92% from 3. He was 11 of 12 from 3 in this series against the Cavs. Just ridiculous. Josh Hart, he had a rough game 1, but he was basically lights out ever since and was just doing all sorts of Josh Hart stuff, like hustling his ass off. The team is firing on just all cylinders. I mean, it's really hard to overstate just how dominant this Knicks team has been. I think that during this win streak that they're on, which has now been extended to 11 games, right? Yeah, the last 3 against the Hawks, 4 against Philly, 4 against the Cavs. During this 11-game win streak, it's the best point differential in NBA history, regular season or playoffs. So that's insane. Like that this run of dominance is coming in the middle of the playoffs. They haven't lost a game in 39 days. Their last loss was a 1-point game in game 3 against the Hawks on 4/23. I mean, really, the only negative thing surrounding the Knicks right now is related to Mitchell Robinson because he broke a bone in his pinky, I guess. And that happened since the end of the Cavs series. Mike Brown said it didn't happen in game 4 and it didn't happen in practice. It was not basketball related. I really like Mitchell Robinson as a player. I actually said he should be in consideration for the 6th Man of the Year award this year. That's how highly I think of him. I think he totally impacts games, and we are going to talk about these regular season matchups with the Spurs where Mitchell Robinson was awesome. But I got to say, this guy is a total fucking dumbass. How do you break your hand before the NBA Finals if it's not basketball related? Like, I'm willing to put the dumbass thing into the mic right now because I find it hard to believe like there wasn't some extenuating circumstance, like maybe he had to protect himself or it was a freak thing. I mean, crazy stuff happens. So maybe you want to give the benefit of the doubt. But like, what could you possibly be doing to put yourself in that situation? Just bubble wrap yourself for the next week until you get to the NBA Finals, man, because they are going to need you. You have this 7'5" monster on the other side of the court that you're going to be facing up against, and you're the best threat to stop the guy. It's not going to be Karl Towns. You only have 2 centers on the roster, and this guy breaks his hand. So we'll see. I mean, apparently he already got a procedure, and he's optimistic to play in game 1. I mean, if he doesn't play in game 1, I'd be pretty surprised if the Knicks find a way to win. But that's really the only negative thing heading over the series, right? And it's not like Mitchell Robinson is any type of a shooter. You're not going to be asking him to handle the ball. So maybe you wrap it up like a club, like a defensive lineman, and the guy's still going to be pretty effective out there. I don't know, but it is a huge bummer for Knicks fans that they have that going against them because everything else says that this team is firing on all cylinders and deserves to be considered as a real threat to win the NBA Finals. And finally, let's talk about this NBA Finals, Knicks versus Spurs. And I got to say, I am just so much more excited for this matchup than what I ever really anticipated, at least ever since my Celtics got eliminated, because I just thought that whoever won this series between the Thunder and the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals, like no doubt about it, it's going to be surefire. That series would determine the champion. And even with the Spurs winning, who I thought were the better team when you include those OKC injuries, like I think the Knicks have a very real shot because what they displayed throughout these playoffs in the Eastern Conference, you knew that there was going to be one team that separated themselves from the pack, and like the Knicks could not have been any more dominant in this run to get to the NBA Finals. Now, I know the schedule wasn't the most difficult, right? Playing the Hawks in round 1 and a banged up Philly round 2, and the Cavs, if you want to say they were a weak opponent, whatever. You can only play the teams that were in front of you. I already mentioned why I thought Cleveland was the second best team in the East, and it didn't matter. The Knicks absolutely steamrolled them. And thinking about the matchup itself, I mean, it's just such a dream matchup for the NBA and the league office to get a massive market team like the Knicks. First time they're back in the NBA Finals since like 2000, 2001. It's been over 25 years. Just crazy stuff there. You're playing against the biggest star in the NBA, the future face of the league, and Victor Wembanyama, the most exciting player that the league has to offer right now. And they're playing a massive market team in the Knicks. I mean, it's awesome. And the icing on the cake is like maybe if you really want to get crazy, you could say the NBA Cup. Maybe it actually matters. I mean, we did get this exact matchup in the NBA Cup championship, which of course the Knicks ended up winning. So this is a nice little transition into the regular season matchups, just to give you an idea of what that looked like. The first time that these teams saw each other was actually in the NBA Cup in November. Maybe it was like early December by that point. But either way, the Knicks ended up winning that game. It was kind of a unique point in the season for the Spurs because Wemby was working his way back from, like, I want to say it was a calf strain. So they were being really cautious with him. They were bringing him off the bench. They were also still starting Harrison Barnes at that point in time. They hadn't quite shifted Champagnie into the starting lineup yet. And so the game ended up being pretty close down the stretch, but the story of the game was just the way that the Knicks completely dominated the glass. They had a ton of second chance points. Mitchell Robinson only had 4 points in the NBA Cup, but he had 15 rebounds and was arguably their MVP in that game. That was also the weird stretch in the season where the Knicks were like giving Tyler Kolek real minutes, and I think he had 14 points or something like that. He was awesome in the game. And so the Knicks came out on top in that matchup. The second time that those teams played was actually on New Year's Eve. I actually watched this at my buddy Connor's house. It was a super close game. The Spurs ended up eking this one out. I think it was like 132 to 134. And the reason the Spurs were able to win is because it was a massive Julian Champagnie performance. I'm assuming it was a career high. The guy scored 36 points on New Year's Eve, and the Spurs were able to pull that one out. And the final matchup of the season came in March, and the Knicks just beat the brakes off the Spurs in that one. They also had a huge rebound advantage in that game. And it is interesting to know that the Spurs lost by like 20-something points, and basically everybody played. I mean, I looked over the box score. It looked like both sides were fully healthy. And so if you take stock in the regular season matchup, you have two relatively convincing wins for the Knicks and then one really close win for the Spurs. So that would give an advantage to the Knicks in that scenario. And so what am I going to be watching for in this series? Let's start off with Jalen Brunson. Stephon Castle is going to get that assignment. I think he's going to be pretty well prepared for the matchup with Brunson, considering he just dealt with SGA for 7 games. Obviously, one of the best on-ball defenders in the entire NBA. I will say that Castle just plays so aggressive on both ends of the court. I mean, he just slams into guys on offense. He's always at a risk of an offensive foul with how physical he is on that side of the court. And he did find himself in foul trouble in several games, including Game 7 on Saturday night, where he had 5 fouls. So the Knicks were watching that very closely since they had the series with the Cavs wrapped up. It'll be interesting to see how the Knicks try to exploit that and get Stephon Castle into foul trouble, but I do expect to see that assignment on Brunson. I think on the other end of the court, I would definitely expect to see Victor Wembanyama guard Josh Hart on defense. That way he's able to roam and protect the paint as much as humanly possible, since Hart is easily the weakest shooter in the Knicks starting lineup. Now, Josh Hart, he's not my favorite. It's just more of an anti-Knicks thing just from them beating us in the playoffs last year. He had some very insightful comments about the matchup with Wemby. Josh Hart explained it that the best defensive player in the world is guarding Josh Hart. That must mean that he's pretty damn good at basketball. And it's like, sure, man. In a vacuum, you're all incredible at basketball. We all shouldn't be able to criticize you because we're just plebes that have never played the sport and whatever else. But like, don't be a moron. Don't talk to us like we're 7. Like, you're going to have Wemby guarding you because you can't shoot the ball more times than not. Like, it's that simple. You shouldn't use it as some pride thing. If you want to use this as an excuse to stick out your chest because you're in the NBA Finals, go for it, man. But don't act like this is some compliment to your game that Wemby needs to guard you. No, you're going to have every opportunity to shoot the 3 ball. If you make them, great. You guys will probably win because of it. And if you don't make them, your ass is going to get pulled for Landry Shamet, and Wemby's going to have to figure out how to guard somebody else. So that is going to be interesting. And I do think in a vacuum that if I were to compare from the Spurs perspective, what they just dealt with OKC to the Knicks, I would say that right now, the Knicks pretty comfortably have a better offense than the Oklahoma City Thunder, especially when you include those injuries. I mean, the second options that the Knicks are working with, whether that's Cat, whether that's Mikal Bridges, whether that's OG Anunoby, those second options on the Knicks are all going to be leaps and bounds better than what we experienced with the Oklahoma City Thunder in the last round. And even Jalen Brunson, with the level that he's playing at, he's definitely not as good as SGA because of the size. And I just think SGA is just a bigger, better version of Brunson. But Brunson's pretty damn close and has had some unbelievable playoff moments himself. So very similar team, and you have to assume that Karl Anthony Towns, even if he has an awful series, has to be better than whatever Chet Holmgreen is going to bring to the table. So I expect the Spurs to be at more of a challenge on the defensive end of the court. However, the Spurs should have a much easier time scoring on New York's defense compared to Oklahoma City's. So the real issue for the Knicks is that they really only have two traditional big men to take that Wemby assignment for most of the game. Those two bigs being obviously Karl Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson, who's dealing with this pinky injury like we just talked about. Now, the Knicks wings are a bit bigger than the Thunder wings, so they might be able to get away with a guy like OG Anunoby, who is like 6'8" and strong as shit in his own right. So maybe he is somebody that you can put on Wemby for large stretches of the game. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. And it is going to be really tricky to see who Wemby guards in the non-Josh Hart lineups because the Knicks are going to have a lot of 5-out options to turn to, right? Like if Josh Hart isn't making shots, you have Landry Shamet, you have Deuce McBride, who's also a pretty solid defender in his own right. Now, if Mitchell Robinson's out there, obviously Wemby's going to be guarding him. That way he can just hang by the paint, but he is going to have the task of keeping Mitchell Robinson off of the offensive glass. So all different things that I'm kind of watching in that matchup there. I think a massive area where the Knicks are going to have an advantage is that, again, in the Western Conference Finals, we only saw a really close end of game scenario, really just in game one. And of course, the Spurs were able to pull out the win in that situation. But in a vacuum, if these two teams were to meet and you knew the game was going to be close at the end of the fourth quarter, I feel like the advantage has to go to the Knicks because as much as I think Wemby is the best player in the series, I do think the Knicks have a better closer in Jalen Brunson. And it's just so much easier for a guy of that size to create his own shot and come off of the screen and get a decent look compared to asking Wemby to do that. So the Knicks are going to have maybe a slight advantage if these games are close at the end. So that's one thing worth noting. But to sing the praise of the Spurs, I do think that they have some good momentum going because Fox finally looks healthy, certainly way healthier than he was in that OKC series with him having his best game in game 7. Dylan Harper has now strung together back-to-back really great games in game 6 and game 7. So if he's playing closer to a star and less like a rookie, the Spurs are in a really good situation. I think a massive key to victory for the Spurs is just going to be winning the rebound battle as well. I mean, that was like the big theme in the 2 losses against the Knicks in the regular season, that the Knicks were able to exploit the fact that outside of Victor Wembanyama, the Spurs are actually a pretty small team. Now, I do think that they can make up for that just because Harper's playing more minutes now. Castle's even better at this stage of the season, and I think both of those two guards have been phenomenal at crashing both the offensive and the defensive glass. Even Champagny and Vassell, both those guys play a lot bigger than what they are. So I think that the Spurs have a little bit more faith in just like figuring it out with the cast of guys that they have. They're also going to have a lot of opportunities to attack Jalen Brunson. I know that Jared McCain played in limited minutes in that Thunder series, and I think that the Spurs could have done a better job of exploiting him when he was out there. But just knowing that Brunson is so valuable to the Knicks offense and that he's going to be on the court for 40 plus minutes in every matchup, I think the Spurs are ultimately going to have success attacking him a bit more and attacking Karl Anthony Towns as well. He mostly avoided foul trouble in the playoffs leading up to this point, but I feel like he's due for a couple dumb cat games where he picks up some easy fouls, and that puts the Knicks in a real deficit. So ultimately, I'm going to roll with my official series prediction of Spurs in 6. I think the Knicks deserve a ton of credit. Like I mentioned before, they're a real threat. They have a real opportunity to win this thing. I think if I were to have to give like a secondary prediction, I'd be much more likely to say Spurs in 7 rather than seeing them close it out in 4 or 5. I just feel like we're going to have a longer series on our hands. If you want me to get really specific, I think that the first 2 games in San Antonio get split. So it's 1-1 after 2 games. I think the next 2 games in New York also get split. So I think we're going to have a 2-2 series on our hands. And then ultimately, I think the Spurs are going to find their rhythm. I think they're going to win at home in game 5. And I think that the Spurs and Victor Wembanyama are going to close it out in Madison Square Garden for game 6, which would just be a really cool moment for the league. I mean, New York might get burnt to the ground just for their fan base after so many years getting that close to an NBA Finals and losing to this generational superstar in Victor Wembanyama on their home court. That would be pretty catastrophic, but it would also make a phenomenal TV product. I mean, the crowd shots in that game for game 6, if the Spurs have a shot to close it out, are going to be special. So that's what I'm going with as my official series predictions. And let me know what you think. So that's going to do it for this podcast today. Sorry for a rather long, rambling episode, but we did have a lot to cover just with the conclusion of the Western Conference Finals, the Eastern Conference Finals, saying goodbye to a couple teams, and of course, previewing what I think is going to be a phenomenal NBA Finals. Just a tremendous matchup for the league, tremendous matchup for really any sort of basketball fan, I think you can appreciate that we just get another couple weeks of watching Wemby, this guy in his third year, pursuing a title against the Knicks. Look, you can say whatever about the Knicks fans. I don't always love them, but they have a large, very passionate fan base. So it is cool to see them have an opportunity to get back in the NBA Finals after so many years. So it's going to be a blast. I cannot wait for Wednesday night. Hopefully, you guys are excited as I am. I don't know exactly what I'm going to have in store for my next podcast episode. It'll probably just be me on the next episode. I am expecting to drop that probably after game 2 of the finals. Game 1 is on Wednesday. Game 2 is on Friday. I think game 3 is going to be on Monday. So I'll probably record it sometime next weekend. And then we can kind of check in after 2 games to see how things are going, react to those performances, and go from there. So before I let you go, be sure to follow @Words with Wallace on everything. That includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts, on social media as well, on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even Facebook for my old heads. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.